Hello everyone. Today I'm doing another skill breakdown, this time for the somewhat infamous Sir Pelleas. Pelleas is a rightful alignment defender. You unlock him during Act 1, and up front he doesn't really have a whole lot going for him to make him stand out. If you've seen some of my other videos, then you are probably pretty aware of my opinion on him and his contributions to your potential team and rosters. The one thing I will give him credit for, though, is in his traits. He has the Drill Master trait, where if you make him the Master of Arms at your training ground, he does provide a buff to your entire roster's physical debuff resistance. That's not bad. At maximum level, this would be 12%, and this can definitely make a difference to get your characters over that 50% threshold. And once you reach over 50%, you become much more resistant to certain effects and immune to things such as knockdown. So if you really like that Drill Master trait, you could maybe keep him as a bench hero purely for his facility trait. I know many players do the same thing with Ector to generate that dust at the tower. So if there aren't a whole lot of characters you're one to rotate through on your active roster, and you have the extra slot laying around, you could keep them for that. I will not be quite as generous when we get into his actual skills, so let's go ahead and just get to the meat of it. Starting in Tier 1, we have the basic strike attack, 3 AP, 100% weapon damage, and standard upgrades on it, nothing out of the ordinary. You can give it bleed with bleeding strike for 15% damage, and bleeds of course proc at the start of their turn and whenever they perform an action, whether it be an attack, a skill, what have you. Killing blow, so he gets an AP back when killing a unit with a strike. I don't think you should ever really take this one. Defenders do not get many kills early on in the game, like Act 1, they will get some, but even then they're not going to be getting a whole lot. So I don't really think this is a great investment. Bonebreaker, increase the damage by 15%. This one is not bad. If you kind of have a skill point laying around, nothing you really want to get with it, this isn't bad. Like I've mentioned before, their damage isn't great, but some extra damage isn't a bad thing either. Sweeping Strike, however, this fourth upgrade, I actually really do like. You gain an AP for the first strike on each enemy, so it gives you a little bit of a refund and can help you just get extra attacks out, and some of that chip damage can make the difference in helping to secure a kill. The first active ability is a staple, Shield Charge. Every defender has it, and it's amazing with all of them. Good mobility, comes with a knockback, and if they're immune to the knockdown effect, they'll just be knocked back, but it does come with a built-in knockdown. Very strong status condition to set on enemies, as it does provide a damage bonus against them. Shield Spikes gives it 25% more weapon damage, so this would bring it up to 75% weapon damage, which isn't a bad percentile amount, but again, it's defender damage. I think you're better moving that skill point elsewhere. You're definitely going to want Wade Charge, so that way you can use it more often by reducing the cooldown by 1. Extended Charge, you're increasing the range by 2, and that's going to be very, very useful. And Momentum. If you kill an enemy with it, it resets the cooldown. I have killed very few enemies with Shield Charge because usually I'm not using it to target enemies that would get killed by it. I'm using it to target enemies that are fairly healthy, and I want my defender to get to them so they can start tanking them. So just based on how at least I generally use Shield Charge, I'm not going to be targeting enemies that this would have a chance at killing anyways 90% of the time or more, so I don't really think this is a great pick. In Tier 1, he does have Guard, however, which is a pretty strong defensive ability, great for hunkering down if you need to wait out a turn or something. It provides a large amount of armor to himself and allies next to him. Based on the amount of AP you spend on using Guard, the more AP you have when you use it, the more armor it'll generate. And a lot of the time, if I'm going to use Guard, it's pretty much going to be one, maybe two things I'm doing that turn. Sometimes I'll combo it with Taunt. Other times I'll just use Guard. You shouldn't really bother using this a whole lot, I think, if you only have the minimum cost of 2 AP, unless you just have an ally that's really, really low and you're just desperate to prevent as much damage as possible. You're definitely better off, in most cases, trying to maximize the amount of AP you use when using this ability. He does also enter an Overwatch state, which is a benefit, but ultimately minor compared to the other main effect of this ability. All very good upgrades on this ability. With Defend Ally, it grants an additional +3 armor to, in this case, Pelleas and allies within range. This scales as you level. You can see there every 10 levels, so it's not a huge amount, but every bit can definitely matter. With Resting Guard, it just gives Pelleas an extra AP on his next turn. It's kind of a mechanic, at least the way I see it. You spent all your AP on this last turn, so here's a little extra AP the next turn, so sort of a give and take. You did nothing this round actively, so we'll give you an extra AP on his next turn so he can maybe do a few more things. Not the most important upgrade on this skill, but it is still a solid one. Vindicator, you increase the range of guard by 1, which is helpful because sometimes you don't have the AP or the movement available to get everyone to be directly adjacent to him. So now they can be 1 tile further away, and with that kind of range, it's actually very easy to get your entire party with this. And lastly, Nightly Zeal, reduce the cooldown by 1. Being able to use this every 2 turns is very helpful, especially when you get to some of those tougher missions and you just are really trying to mitigate damage consistently. The next passive is Unyielding, not one I'm necessarily a huge fan of. I think it's a lot stronger early, but not as much later on. But it does definitely have some uses. My opinion of it has sort of grown a bit recently. I still don't think it's anything amazing, but it's not terrible. It's pretty simple. You regain 6 HP for each hit. This amount of HP scales up the higher you go and level. The upgrades are pretty solid on it, even if you're not a huge fan of the base skill. All of them adding to the tankiness of the character fairly well. The first one, probably the least impactful, Endurance plus 10% Vitality from accessories and trinkets. So it's just accessories and trinkets, which are going to be these 2 slots here. I avoid Vitality damage as much as possible in general, because that enables injuries, and then you have to maybe sit them out at the hospice. But if you're playing on a higher difficulty and you find yourself going into Vitality damage every now and then, every bit can help, and this could be useful to you. The next one I think is a lot more impactful, Extra HP plus 5% HP from your Armor Sigil. HP is the damage that you're going to be taking most of the time, definitely in comparison to Vitality, and this helps act as a buffer to your Vitality and your potential injuries, so having more HP I think is more important than having more Vitality. Physical Resistance just provides a 15% physical debuff resist, which is great. Your defenders being resistant to debuffs is quite useful, because if they get stunned, then they're not going to be able to defend your teammates. The last one, Ruthlessness, regains 6 HP for each kill. Again, this is a scaling one. Also, not great. You don't get a lot of kills. I've mentioned this before, so I won't keep beating a dead horse, but just not something, at least in my experience, happens a lot. But when it does happen, it does have a nice combo with Unyielding, because you do hit them, so you get 6, and then if you kill them, you get another 6 for 12. So it's a decent amount if you do get a kill. I just don't get that many kills with my defenders. At least not Pelleas. The next 3 passives are pretty straightforward. Strength for extra weapon damage, 10%. If you're trying to go an offensive route with him, I guess. Vigilance, less damage from opportunity attacks and Overwatch attacks. I've never really taken this on any of my defenders because I haven't really seen this as much of a problem. And then Robust, it's a very solid passive to just give yourself extra HP, extra Vitality. Again, I'm a bigger fan of the HP, and the more HP you have, the harder it is for your defender to die, and these can really add up to making your defender just a really heavy tank. Going on to tier 2, we have a classic defender ability with Taunt, amazing skill, just forces all enemies within range to attack Sir Pelleas, which is great for protecting the rest of your allies. It doesn't say here, but if the enemies do have 50% or more physical debuff resist, they will not be taunted. Just keep that in mind. With the upgrade of Armor Bait, you gain 6 armor, which is good. You're going to be taking attacks, so more armor means less potential damage you'll be taking from those taunted enemies. Fomorian Curse, reduce the cost of taunt by 1. Being able to do it for 2 AP is very useful, so that way you can maybe move up to enemies and it'll be more likely you'll have AP left over to do a taunt. Personally, I find Shield Charge into Taunt to be a pretty strong combination. Demoralize reduces enemies affected by Taunt by -1 AP, so now they may only be able to do 1 attack against you instead of 2. Just another way of further diminishing the enemy turn as they are forced to attack your defender. The last upgrade is Warcry, increase the range by 1. Obviously going to be useful to try and taunt enemies from as far away as possible and catch as many enemies as possible. The next active skill is a damage ability, Flurry. You attack 2 enemies for 100% weapon damage. It's basically just a more efficient way of using your strike skill. Instead of 6 AP to hit 2 enemies, it'll be 4 AP for 2. With the first upgrade, you gain 30% armor break, which is not a bad upgrade on this. Defenders don't have a whole lot of armor break, so this does give them a bit of utility in that regard. With Zestful Flurry, you gain 1 AP when killing a unit with Flurry. I don't get many kills, so I don't ever take this one. Dismemberment, increase the damage by 15%, definitely a skill you're going to want to pick up if you're taking a damage skill. And Extended Flurry, increase the amount of targets by 1, so now you can hit 3. I never really take this ability. I think if you have an item that makes it where you taunt enemies whenever you strike them, then this would actually be pretty good, because then you could taunt enemies outside of your taunt cooldown, 2 to 3 enemies, which is definitely very solid for the sake of only 4 AP. If you get one of those items, then I think this is worth picking up. Outside of that, not so much. Next up is a classic ability that all heavy armor users have, Armorer. It reduces the AP penalty from heavy armor sigils by 1. This is just useful so you can do more actions in your turn. The Defender variant has 4 upgrades, 2 thick-skinned, and 2 fitted armor. This is basically just 2 armor bonuses and 10% HP total between both of them, 5% each. All of these are really solid if you're trying to build up your Defender to be as tanky as possible. We have Strong-Willed, which is 30% mental debuff resist. It's not a bad skill, but it's usually one of the last abilities I take when I'm spending my skill points, just because I think there are stronger defensive skills to take earlier on that are more impactful, but this is definitely something to consider as you get later into the game. Lastly is the Second Robust. Just like in Tier 1, it's a solid pick, something you can take fairly early on, and it will have some usefulness. Getting into Tier 3 is Recuperate, the last active skill you pick up. It grants a huge amount of temporary HP, 50 at max level, for 1 turn. This is obviously a huge defensive buffer if you're expecting to take a lot of damage, and normally, for any other defender, I actually recommend not taking this ability because it just feels so unnecessary. I've never struggled with survivability on my defenders by the time I've reached Tier 3 to such a point where I'm like, wow, sure wish I had Recuperate. No, most of the time I'm fine. However, Pelleas doesn't really have any extra abilities in his skill tree to compete against it like pretty much every other defender does. So he's going to have some extra skill points lying around compared to them, so at that point, I guess why not take Recuperate, because you have the skill points for it, I suppose. The upgrades on it definitely do help this ability a lot more, and again, for Pelleas, I guess it's worth taking. Even with all the upgrades, I just think it's an unnecessary skill investment for literally every other defender. But with the first upgrade, Regain Armor, you now gain plus 7 armor. This would be 8 at max level when using Recuperate, so temporary HP and an armor buff, that's good. Bolster, increase the amount of temporary HP by an extra 23, 25 at max level, so now it's 75, which is an enormous amount. Gain 30% mental debuff resistance, again, very solid to prevent yourself from being stunned or something. And Benediction, it now lasts 2 turns. All this all together is really good for adding a huge amount of bulkiness to your defender. And for Pelleas, sure, why not, I suppose. Next is just a series of passives. The first one is All Resistance. This is a pretty solid one, safe pick on all the defenders that have it offered. Plus 15% debuff resistance of both types. And I've already talked before about being able to resist debuffs on your defender can be very useful. With the upgrades, Physical Resistance and Mental Fort, it's just another 15% for a total of 30% of both types. That's very solid. Dot Resistance, you have -1 turn duration for bleeds, burns, and poisons. Generally not a big deal for your defender because they're so tanky. The damage from these don't really do a whole lot to you. And lastly is Extra Vitality. If you just really are taking vitality damage consistently, this is worth taking. An extra injury token to prevent some of those injuries. Hopefully you won't need to take this one. Next up is Shield Block. The base skill is probably the best part of this entire skill and its upgrades. Just 5% more block. Block is the strongest damage mitigation tool for your defender. so being able to get this as high as possible will save a lot of hurt for your defender. The upgrades, while not being as good as the base skill in my opinion, are still decent. Shield Bait is an extra 5% block, but you do need to be using Taunt or Guard. You're going to be using those pretty often, so you're going to be benefiting from this, and if you're not using both on the same turn, that does give you an extremely high uptime for this extra 5% block, where it's nearly permanent. Flank Defense is a very good skill, because if enemies are to the left or right, you don't block them, but with this skill, you will still get some block to reduce the damage. As good as this skill is, there is a lot of different gear options to make it so your defender always turns to face the attacker, and then actually block them. So if you have one of those items, this skill point is completely irrelevant. Do not take it. But if you just can't seem to find that item, this is probably a solid investment. Stalwart Defender, plus 5% block when you're at full HP, and when you're at 0 HP, it's 0. You're going to have fairly high HP on your defender most of the time, so you're going to get some level of bonus to your block from this. This is definitely a good pick. First Strike is another good one. Damage suffered from the first attack of each enemy in an encounter is reduced by 100% if you block it. And if you have that item I was just talking about, pretty much that's going to be every enemy. You're going to take 0 damage one time from every single enemy. That's a huge amount of damage negation. Even without that item, if you're smart in remembering to turn your defender to face towards incoming enemies, you're going to be negating at least a fair portion of the enemy's attacks at least once. And then last 3, Strength for 10% more weapon damage, Robust again for HP and Vitality, and Hardened Armor. This is probably the best out of these last 3, I think. Reduce armor loss by 20%. The longer your armor lasts, the more damage mitigation you have, the tankier you are. And that's it for Sir Pelleas. As I've alluded to before, extremely basic skill tree, super vanilla, nothing special here. The main reason I see for bringing him is if you're really looking for a defender that has the more classical defensive abilities like Taunt and Guard, as opposed to Sir Mordred, then this is the guy you're going to want, and you'll be bringing him on secondary missions. You do have to be careful. His negative trait has been removed here. If he's missing Vitality or has an injury, you can't bring him on a mission at all, and that can be a little annoying. Once you get later into the game and you have access to other defenders that do have Taunt or Guard, if you're going the Christian route, as they do have access to a number of defenders, there really is no reason to use him whatsoever. And even if you're going Old Faith, you do get access to Percival if you put Lady Guinevere on your table. He's Christian, so his loyalty won't be great, but honestly, even with a low loyalty, like, even if Percival's loyalty is at -10, and Pelleas' loyalty is at 20, I would still take Percival. Like, that's how big of a difference is between the two characters, I think. So, he's really a good early to mid-ish game option, but because of how basic his skill tree is, not that it's bad, it's just so underwhelming compared to other options who directly power creep him, you won't really be keeping him for long other than just to use his Drill Master trait. That's all I have for this video, and thanks for watching.